Let's see. You asked who that is. It's Brad Pitt from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood as Cliff Booth. Just gonna wait another second, see if anyone hops in before I start drawing on this one. All right. So I think in the last few days, this is the 4th Blackwing pencil that I've started with, fresh. It's looking like I'm probably going to have to get a Blackwing pencil extender because they don't fit in any of the extenders that I already have. Unless I want to tear the eraser off completely. I'd like to not do that so I can preserve the square erasers that they're known for. I did notice yesterday with just how much sharpening I have to do for these pencils. The difference in length after not very long drawing with them is pretty drastic. And so because of that, there's a slight lack of control in the sketch phase, so I'll probably go back to using these once I start adding a little bit more shading. And apologies for the extra noise. Sounds like my neighbors are doing dishes, which is just loud in my office, so it is what it is. Okay. So this is day 23. I went back and counted and officially have done 23 days live streaming at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So far in that time, something that I've figured out is that I am preferring to draw in graphite again more than I enjoyed drawing with the ink. Probably still do a little bit of that ballpoint drawing, but I feel like I kind of rabbit trailed and started to enjoy the process a little less. So I feel like probably for the rest of this series anyway, for the next I think it's 12 days now, 13 or 12 days, I'm going to draw these graphite full page portraits. And like the other ones, I'll talk a little bit about art, but most of the time, if I'm being honest, I'll bore myself if I talk about art while I make art. So if anyone has technical questions or anything they want to know about the process, I'm happy to answer it. Never mind that, but I will probably just ramble unless people bring up stuff they want to talk about. This is something I mentioned in some of the other portraits that I've done this in the last couple weeks, is that I tend to prefer to draw people with lined faces, beards, you know, things like that, because you can really gauge like the sort of markers on the face. And this one is a little bit of a departure from that because it's Mr. Fountain of Youth himself. So other than a fake scar on his forehead, there's not much to go with other than just contour. So I find that when I do sketches, like when it's in the sketch phase before it gets into more of the detail. He's also at an odd angle, so I need to factor that in. These require a little bit more adjustment. Can already tell it's such a weird little thing. Also just variations in how someone might hold their mouth in a certain pose. And bring this out a little bit more. I mentioned the other day that I notice on the days that when I run, which is most days, I tend to feel a little less inhibited as I draw. So not necessarily that I draw better, for clarification, but I have more patience for it. I feel like it's something I pretty much just have to factor in all the time. On the days that I don't run, I feel like I have less patience for the tedium of some of these portraits. But on that note, I ran a 10K for the first time today. A fairly decent time. So I got a big old endorphin rush before drawing. All right. I'm not liking how this is looking, but it's kind of what we're here for, is to adjust. It's not art related, but something that I was thinking about earlier as I was running. Notice this tendency lately, especially because of where we live, for people to treat the gym that we all pay to go to like it's their living room, taking loud calls on treadmills, turning off fans that the entire group is using because they don't want it on them, that type of stuff, not cleaning up after themselves. There's somebody left their gum on the treadmill yesterday, right next to the track. And I feel like a lot of that is just people how they are now. They just don't really care, but I also do wonder if that's a product of where we live. It's one of those things of like the love-hate relationship I have with the city. If you haven't listened to me ramble about this stuff in the last couple of weeks, we live in San Francisco. I feel like, I don't know, every podcast, everybody's talking about how this city went to hell. And they're not wrong. I think they're wrong about the reasons that it went that way. I don't know that it really has much to do with anybody in charge here. I think it's the tech community, all like the tech bros. That entire demographic seems to be oblivious of the fact that other people are living around them. Like they live staring at their phones. Which, like, I know I'm streaming and you're listening to me talk on a phone, I'm sure. But there's just like a subtle difference in, you know, like if you walk around without looking at your phone in San Francisco, it's astonishing how many people will just walk right into you because they don't look up. People cross the street without looking up, just staring at their phone, walking through stop signs. It's astonishing. I know I'm going to come back and adjust these a bit, but I don't want to worry about the total shape for a little bit. I'm going to build around them. I want a little more contour, things to map off of. Yeah, I wonder about, like, in terms of San Francisco in general, what the future of the city really is. So the city is leading the U.S. in return to work policies. And it's already like kind of been ravaged by the tech bro community. A lot of tech vests and people with very expensive dogs they bought from breeders that don't know how to behave. It's just kind of like the culture here is no longer culture unless you go to an older neighborhood. Heavy drop shadow here. I'll come back and mess with that a little bit. Yeah, not to say that I miss living in Texas, but by comparison, I feel like there is a general air of even false politeness that people tend to respect. Maybe just out of fear because everyone's, as a culture, more hot-headed there. But man, San Francisco is just like a tech trash can now. I moved across the country to live here, and I spend most of my time inside just because interacting with a lot of the people here is pretty unpleasant. Anyway, some more rambling brought to you by me. Yeah, the guy earlier that I was mentioning in the gym turned off a fan that 5 other people had on them. I was one of the 5. Then put a towel over his head and got on a dating app and walked at a very slow pace on a treadmill next to people who were all doing like marathon training and long distance runs. And then somebody got off and turned the fan back on, and then that guy got mad and then got back off his treadmill and turned the fan off, and then got back on and looked at his dating app the whole time. It was kind of like a whole picture of your standard issue San Francisco tech guy. I just feel like when people say the city's kind of falling apart, it's not so much the homelessness and all that stuff. I think it's a lot of like the apathy and sort of general attitude towards everyone that a lot of that tech community has. It's one thing to be socially inept, but it's another thing to be socially apathetic. Anyway, enough about that. Talk about this movie that I'm drawing the character from. It's a movie that I feel like really divided people whether or not they were fans. I think it is actually one of Tarantino's best films. I do think that the novelization of the movie was it kind of degrades the quality of the character in the film. Almost like the charm that he brought to the character wasn't really conveyed well in the book. I remember getting to the end of that book and feeling, without spoiling anything, not disappointed in the fact that they didn't cover all the content from the movie, but the fact that it kind of was a non-ending sort of fell flat. It definitely painted his character as a less charming guy. So I'm curious to see what the continuance of Cliff Booth's character will be in this new film, which should be interesting. I mean, it's written by Tarantino, directed by David Fincher, and then obviously Brad Pitt's back for Cliff Booth. I imagine it's going to be slightly more depressing because it's not the duo from the film previously, which I think there was a lot of magic that they did there, just in terms of those two guys bouncing off of each other. I think when you remove the sort of caretaker aspect of his character, it may make him a little less endearing, sort of like how he is in the book. Which I think, like, when I was reading that book, a lot of people were posting sort of spoiler reviews, which is another thing. Kind of goes along with that whole apathy thing I was talking about. A lot of people were upset that he didn't retrace all of the steps of the movie, like the ending that everyone kind of knows it for. I really honestly didn't mind that that wasn't in the book. I was kind of curious to see if it was written differently for the sake of the film, like for more practical filming techniques, but more than anything, I just felt like it just showed a less likable side of both of the main characters. So I'm kind of hoping that that doesn't carry over into this next film, which I feel like typically in anything that Fincher has made with Brad Pitt, they tend to focus more on like the charm of his characters rather than the darker side, even in like some of his really dark films. So maybe that'll carry over. But it's also, if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure they're shooting it digitally, which is already going to be a slight departure in not just quality, but the feel of it. Just gonna go ahead and start shaping out more of his face, since he doesn't have really any facial hair to work with. So this is like still in the very rough stages of sketch, so I know I'm gonna adjust these. But that's, like I've said before, it's better to fix a drawing than it is to obsess over perfecting details before you get it going. When this film originally came out, if nobody knows what I'm talking about, it's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It's a Tarantino film. There was a friend of mine who I always disagreed with about movies, and he went and saw it and said that it was the worst movie he'd ever seen and he would never watch it again. And I knew that I'd love it. Because usually when he gave me reviews like that, it meant I'd probably be a big fan. I think a lot of people just expected him to do like a repeat of all of his previous films, which there were elements of that, but he also has all of these actors that are not just character actors, but have their own personality more than I think a lot of the people he's worked with traditionally in the past. But that said, I'm also not a, I do love a lot of Tarantino stuff, but I'm not the biggest fan of him as a guy. There's something about a guy that code switches that hard when he's around certain people for certain movie promotions. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can Google that and it comes up. It's pretty embarrassing. So I think predominantly in the Django Unchained press tour, it's like some of the weirdest code switching I've ever seen. Looks like we're due for some neighborly noise for a little while. Apologies for that. No, not Val Kilmer. It's in the description of the video, or the title of it. It's Brad Pitt as Cliff Booth. It's funny, when I ask people to guess who it is, no one guesses, but when I don't say anything about it, everyone guesses. Which, speaking of Val Kilmer, I was drawing a portrait of him as Doc Holliday the day before they announced that he died. I didn't really want to finish it. I don't really like to do those videos of people that, or the, not the videos, but the drawings of people right when they pass away. Like, even if I do draw them, it's like a weird trend, in my opinion, unless it's like I guess some people can get away with it because that's just what they do, but it seems like a weird, like, clout chasing sort of look at my version of this guy since he's in the headlines. But also, to be fair, it wasn't my favorite drawing. It was based on a heavily contrasted portrait of him, and so there were elements of it that I didn't really love. It's also one of the reasons, like, I've had people ask me before why I don't draw more, like, I say people, but I will not name those people I know, that ask why I don't draw more, like, political stuff and, you know, like, ideological stuff. And a lot of this is about escapism. So, drawing movie characters, or, you know, the whole idea is to kind of zone out and enjoy the process and not have a statement. Which I'm kind of a firm believer. Like, I totally love that everyone has their own opinions and beliefs and all that, but I don't know that we all need to be yelling at each other about it. You know, some of the best artists I know, we believe wildly different stuff. And some people are really political, and I get it. I think it also depends on where you live. You know, there's a couple artists that I started following a long time ago that I believe, I can't remember where Sketchball is, but I think he's in the UK, and he was reposting drawings that were really, really well done, ballpoint pen drawings, like hyper detail. And it's a woman named Abir, and I liked what he reposted, and then she messaged on a bunch of my art, and we've followed and supported each other. And most of her stuff is about the region she lives in, so I get it. But kind of to the point that I was talking about, I live in San Francisco, so I don't really want to draw the mayor or, you know, tech bros or tech giant people. It's more about escapism and drawing stuff that personally interests me. Thank you. But I think that's kind of like, it's a personal brand of sorts. It's the same way I feel about music. All the music that I've played over the years with different bands or my music, occasionally something will come out that has kind of a real heavy opinion in it, but for the most part, it's just storytelling of sorts. It's kind of just trying to write something that people can nod their head to. There's a famous argument that happened between, I'll finish that in a sec. Would I be able to draw Elvis Presley? I have drawn him in ballpoint pen ink, but I will draw him again if that's something people want to see. I haven't drawn him on this scale, but yeah. Um, completely lost my train of thought. Just talking about music. Oh yeah, there's a famous argument between John Lennon and Paul McCartney. And John Lennon got mad at him because he wouldn't get political or voice like opinions to help people. And he told Paul McCartney that it can't always be puppies and rainbows and unicorns and pizza. And something along those lines. And I always thought that was funny because for some people that it kind of has to be that. They can't take on the world's problems, you know. And while a lot of people claim art's powerful, I've done art and music my entire adult life, and most of the power I found in it didn't exist in the realms that we occupied. It was one-on-one experiences, people telling us how our music affected them or helped them, stuff like that. And that music was all about just like, you know, rock and Americana and stuff. It was love songs and things like that, sad songs. None of it had a real message to it other than your standard song. See, you said you're an Elvis tribute artist. That's cool. My grandmother was obsessed with Elvis. She's got a bunch of his scarves and things from his concerts. She, I can't remember what state it was. It might have been Missouri, but she was like Miss Missouri or something. She was a beauty queen when she was younger, and she was obsessed with that and Elvis, and she would always try to get really close front row, and she caught a couple of his scarves. So she has like a little Elvis treasure trove. You can already see I'm going to adjust this jawline a little bit and bring it out. It's an odd angle that he's got his head cocked. It really changes what he's on. I think also the barreling on the lens that they're using is a little different than what I thought it was initially. Kind of warps the frame. But yeah, more about what I was saying. I think that some artists are just kind of well suited to just make cool stuff. I kind of feel like I'm in that category, even if it's only cool for me, you know. I think also escapism is something that everyone needs from time to time. It's why people watch movies and why they listen to music and, you know, podcasts to an extent. A lot of that stuff is about not being in your head. So, but I have, you know, people I'm close with that they kind of feel like they need to take on the world's burden, so everything they do has some kind of charged message. But to that same point, I feel like there's not a whole lot you can do at a broke artist level. You know, you can make stuff, but I've noticed like an uptick in fully AI art accounts everywhere. I mean, mainly on Instagram, but there's been quite a few that I've seen just in the last month or so where it's very clearly AI art, and like even the captions seem to be generated by AI. And those accounts have like 100,000 plus followers, so it's kind of like there's no winning, you know. It's just kind of like a crapshoot. Who you know, who you work with, something trending. I feel like that's kind of like that, I forget the guy's name, but he used to make, or he still probably makes videos, but there's a video of him where he says you don't need permission to make cool stuff, you can just do it. I feel like some people are just that way. Some people need something to attach their Creative Chariot too. Not necessarily one of those people. Actually, getting ahead of myself here. I'm gonna keep it in line with all the other ones I've done. This is more of a floating head. Don't even need to worry about the neckline. Which, like, what a neckline. This dude's neck is as wide as his giant jaw. That lucky individual, or however you want to put it. A well-funded face. He's got this like extra feathered hair, which now that I'm looking at this, I think is actually his real hair in this photo. I don't think it's a hairpiece. I'll just have to do that. I didn't really know that there were still Elvis tribute acts floating around. I mean, I guess like in certain areas, like Vegas for sure. No knock. It's just I felt like it's kind of a lost art. I don't know if that guy's still watching, but respect. It makes me. It's not remotely related, but it's funny. I'm not a big Garth Brooks fan, and especially more recently. But being from Texas, you hear a lot of it. His real name is not Garth Brooks. His name is Troy Lee. And I played with a guy who thought that like a great like retirement plan for like a gigging musician would be to put together a Garth Brooks tribute band and call it Troy Lee Yours. And every member of the band dress up like a different era of Garth and sing those songs with like the wraparound face mic and the Takamine guitars and the, you know, heavily patterned shirts. Always thought that was a funny idea. Which is also like even funnier. Without context, you wouldn't know, but the guy who had that idea was such a jerk that it was just odd that he had such a silly idea. He was kind of hell-bent on being really serious all the time. But yeah, it's just funny. I feel like tribute acts are kind of a lost art in general. I feel like there used to be a lot more of them, especially for Elvis. I mean, he is the tribute act. I'm gonna lift these lines a little bit because I don't know that I'm going to go that dark in contour. Which, funny, another thing that made me think of my old band was one of the first bands to ever play, first rock bands to ever play at the Owens Theater, which is like the Cow Palace kind of Bakersfield spot. It's traditionally only for country bands, but we were on tour with a country band and they brought us along. And not long before that, Garth Brooks had proposed to his wife, Trisha Yearwood, on stage there, right next to a bronzed statue of himself, which I thought was just kind of a funny, like, for anyone else to do that, that would be incredibly weird. But when we played our set there, they didn't want to take it off the stage, so we played an entire rock set in a country venue next to a 7-foot tall statue of Garth Brooks. It was really weird. But yeah, it's a cool place that they have. Honestly, I can't remember. I don't know if it's Buck Owens' old Cadillac or if he bought it off of Elvis or what the deal was, but I know that Elvis was somehow in the mix of that, and they had that Cadillac mounted over the bar in the venue. So it's pretty cool. Like, it's mounted at an angle where you're looking into the cab of the convertible Cadillac, and it's got big longhorns on the front of the car over the grill. But the family that runs it now, since Buck Owens is no longer around, their son that manages it told us we were the first rock band to ever play there, and was very welcoming about having us back, but we never made it back. That's also kind of like the legend there, is that Buck Owens opened it and played there whenever he wanted, and then he had kind of like an office / apartment above it. And so we all got to go in there and kind of look at his little setup and his desk and the couch and everything. And the last show that he ever played, he played a 4-hour set, didn't take a break, played through the whole thing. Crowd starts to leave. He goes upstairs, sits on the couch, passes away. And so the sort of running theme there is that if something goes wrong with the sound, with the lights, you're like, uh-oh, Buck's ghost is back. It's also just like really rich with history, because there's not a single wall space in that place that doesn't have a framed signed photo of some famous person that was there to hang out with Buck or Dwight Yoakam or any of those people. But it's in Bakersfield, so I feel like it kind of gets overlooked, because Bakersfield, unless you're into like rodeos or cattle, stuff like that, a lot of people only stop there on their way through to get to LA or other parts of Southern California. Actually, now that I'm looking at this, I'm going to bring these up as well. Yeah, that was one of those funny moments. There's a lot of, especially from all the different years of touring that I did with different bands, we had a lot of surreal moments like that. But there's just something odd about being on stage with a 7-foot tall bronze statue of Garth Brooks. Maybe this is a hairpiece. Now that I'm looking at it, his roots here all look very glued down. I guess it's not that hard to match Brad Pitt's hair color. I can tell he's definitely wearing a wig in the leaked photos of the new film. I'll go ahead and just take this a little bit more contrasted. Falls off pretty hard over here. I don't know that I'll go as dark as the actual reference photo on this side, but we'll see. It just kind of depends on how much graphite I'm wanting to lay down here, because I do want to avoid a glare. I've mentioned it on some of the other live streams that with the diffuse lights that I have, at most angles, it creates a pretty heavy glare on the graphite once you get a lot of graphite dust on the page. So the only way around that really is to tilt it at a certain angle that's really uncomfortable to draw at. Close the window for a minute. spare y'all some of the noise. Still haven't seen that Brad Pitt F1 movie. Curious about it, but not $25 rental curious. I feel like F1 really has kind of taken off in a different way since the Netflix show. Now everyone's really invested in that, which I get it to an extent, but I think it also ramps up like how much criticism people have for films based around it. Like the number one comment that I've seen is that he's too old to be in F1, but go watch a Kevin Costner baseball film. Tell me that he's not 20 years north of an acceptable age for a star pitcher, unless it's the 90s or before. It's kind of that inability for people to suspend disbelief for the sake of a movie. Same as what criticism he got for playing, I can't remember his character's name, Don something, Top in Fury. Because those actors, I mean, pretty much everyone except for one character were at least a decade too old to play those characters for people that would have been enlisted or non-commissioned. But that's the whole point of movies, is suspend disbelief unless you're watching a documentary. And even then, I've worked on some film crew stuff for documentaries, and man, are they edited a certain way to make you take it differently than how they're saying it. A lot of like those long pauses of people looking off sullenly in documentaries, it's actually them waiting to be told that they're about to talk, and they just cut that footage in there. So even documentaries, you still have to suspend your disbelief a little bit, sort of having to choose a narrative that you really want. I feel like that's the case, though. I mean, there's a few films that I can't watch just because of I'm incapable of suspending disbelief for some of them, like music films. Having been a player for so long and being able to play multiple instruments, if I see somebody in a film and they're playing on the ride cymbal, but it's clearly the hi-hat, or vice versa, or they're literally not in time with the song that's being played, it just takes me right out of the film. Which is sort of like how I gauge what makes a good, not just like a biopic, but a good music film. Like a really overlooked music film is that thing you do. Has nothing to do with Brad Pitt, but just talking about movies in general. Everyone in that can really play that stuff, even though it was the guys from Fountains of Wayne that wrote it and performed it for the track. They all learned how to play the song. So there's a certain believability to that, where it's easier to believe that they might be playing it. Or like on the other hand, I'm from Texas, so La Bamba was a very popular film regionally when I was there. And some of the worst music on screen ever. Like Bob is playing drums when there's basically not drums happening. It's one of the laziest editing and filmmaking experiences, but it's also La Bamba, so it's great for some reasons, but not super accurate. Or like I think one that got sort of unfairly knocked was Walk the Line. The music supervisor of that film is T-Bone Burnett, which, if you don't know who that is, he, played with Bob Dylan in the band. He's been a legendary producer for a long time, and pretty much any time a film has him attached, it's going to have good music. But Walk the Line, all those guys that are in the bands are actual players. So like the guy that played Jerry Lee Lewis, I've actually played shows with him, and he is basically that character. I mean, without the young wife scandal, but um, he's kind of got that same attitude about him, so it makes him more believable, and he can play and sing well. His name's Waylon Malloy Payne. And then the same goes for uh, Shooter Jennings playing his dad, Waylon. We toured with Shooter, and he's kind of just playing himself in that. I mean, he takes after his dad a lot, but it adds a certain credibility, whether the viewer's a musician or not. But by comparison, there are music films that I can't really get into. I mean, one of them is that new Bob Dylan thing. Like, Timothy Chalamet is great in some stuff, but man, is that movie not accurate for a handful of reasons. I mean, the main one is that they made Joan Baez like very much a face instead of a voice, if you know what I mean. Which, no knock on Joan Baez, but I would say that she's probably known more for her writing and playing than she is for being the seductress of the film. But also, I think people playing bad guitar and doing sort of like a half accent, it's hard to suspend disbelief there. Kind of like what I was talking about the other day, on like a more positive take of it. There's Inside Llewyn Davis is great. Oscar Isaac actually does play and sing, and like for the things that they had composed for the film specifically, he is doing a very large portion of that playing and singing. So it just adds a different element to it. Even sort of the renditions of songs that he played that were existing songs. But I don't think people liked that movie very much because it was just kind of an odd sort of glance at the middle of a story and didn't have a 3-act structure like a standard story would for most music films. I think another one that's worth mentioning that's more on like the bad side of those portrayals is that I saw the Light film, the Hank Williams one. That movie was garbage. If anything, they should have just gotten his grandson to sing the singing parts because he actually sounds exactly like Hank Sr. But they got a British actor who I like. He's a good actor, but he's not Hank Williams. And his version of that singing was so bad. I feel like I've blocked that movie out of my mind. But it's a fine line, so I get it. Like if somebody, going back to talking about the Brad Pitt thing, if somebody's obsessed with F1 and they know all the details and all the little technical stuff, I could see them having a harder time suspending disbelief. But if you're talking age, I mean, then you have to go back and look at other films. I mean, John Wayne was too old to play pretty much every character he played. Or even more recently, like Saving Private Ryan, like another war film. Most of those guys are way too old to be in that film. I mean, like, everybody, pretty much. So there's an element of suspending disbelief that you have to embrace to enjoy the filmmaking. Somebody is having a conversation outside for sure. Wish they would stop so I could open my window. It's hot in here. This is the type of stuff that makes me miss having a house. It's just being able to like go somewhere and quietly draw. Probably spare y'all all this rambling if it was quiet. but it's either a neighbor noise, like slamming, or loud stuff out in the alley, or me talking. So, you're welcome. Trying to think of other good music films. Crazy Heart's probably one of the best, not just as from the music aspect, but in general. That's another one T-Bone Burnett was the music supervisor for. And then the name I couldn't remember yesterday was Ryan Bingham. He's got a little cameo in that. But that's also all really Jeff Bridges playing and singing. Even if it's sweetened in post, it's definitely him doing it. He did it live, and he may not have run through all those vocal notes as smooth as he did in the film, but same for Colin Farrell. I didn't love his singing, but it's still, I think there's something to having the actors actually do it instead of the tracks. But that's, if I'm not mistaken, that's another Scott Cooper film. Everything he makes is good. But I think there's some songs in that film that I'm sure T-Bone Burnett had a lot to do with. Brand New Angel is actually a great song, just as a song. And that was, if I'm not mistaken, written for that film. And he was really playing it with real players when they were in that little Houston bar. I also like it when actors admit that they can't do the musical aspects, like George Clooney. When they did Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, they asked him, the Coen brothers asked, can you sing? And he said, yeah, of course I can. He has famous singers in his family and always thought he could. And then they recorded him along with the track that I believe all those musicians are from Alison Krauss's band, Union Station. They let him sing with that track, and he heard it back, and he thought that they had done something to his voice, and it turns out that he's just tone deaf, and he's never heard what his voice sounds like recorded when he's singing. And so they overdubbed him. I mean, all of those guys are overdubbed. Somebody else singing for all of it. But to be fair, if I'm not mistaken, I think that's T-Bone Burnett as well, music supervisor. And then the sirens in the river scene, if you have seen it. Mostly just rambling, so I'm not bored in silence. The sirens are Gillian Welch, Emmylou Harris, and I believe Alison Krauss singing those parts. So it's three of like the best Americana or country, like traditional country, not pop country singers, female singers, that aren't Dolly or, anyone like that. So I think there's a sort of pathos that comes along with that kind of quality being just baked into the film. Which, years ago, one of my bands played at ACL, and I got to see those three ladies sing that song live, and it gave me a whole new appreciation for that film. I just had the misfortune of being booked at the same time as a headliner at the other end of the park, and so I could just walk right up to the stage, which I already, I plan on doing that anyway, because David Rawlings and Gillian Welch were playing, so I was going to go and camp and watch their show. But yeah, there's no digital sweetening on anything that they did for that film. I mean, that is just their voices. It's just exactly what they sound like. But on the other hand, then you have the Clooney and John Turturro and I'm blanking on his name. Timothy something. None of them are really singing, so you kind of have the juxtaposition of great background players, and then the main guys can't sing at all. But still, it's a believable music film. And then there's also the guitar player that accompanies him. He's Tommy in the film. I can't remember his actual name, but I've played festivals that he was on and stuck around for his set, and he's on another level. Really good. Another good music film would be Almost Famous, which I think I referenced yesterday as well. It's one of my all-time favorites. That's not Jason Lee singing, obviously. And the guys in the band, this is what I was talking about. Mark, the bass player, is the guy from Sun Kill Moon. He's actually an incredible musician. They're all playing along to the track, but the actual guitar is Peter Frampton. But a great music film nonetheless. I mean, they did it right, but they also had the oversight of Cameron Crowe, who was really around all those guys. And they had Peter Frampton on set as the music supervisor, as well as Nancy Wilson from Heart. So it's like hard to miss with those groups of people being involved. But even still, it's obvious it's not Jason Lee singing. I mean, it goes from having a annoying, whining voice like he has in every Kevin Smith film and all the stuff that he's in, My Name is Earl and all that, and then all of a sudden he has like a gravelly, soulful voice that's 2 octaves lower than him. If I had any critique, it's that. There's also something that I just tend to remember in most films. There's a really glaring editing error at the end of Almost Famous. It's when, spoiler alert, Russell comes back to blank on the character's name. It's played by Patrick Fugit. He's the main character. Comes back to his house, and it's at the very end. The credits are about to roll, and he says that he'll give him his interview, and he leans forward and he says, "First question, what do you love about music?" And he flips a chair around and tosses a t-shirt off of the chair that's hanging over the back of it. And then it cuts to the other coverage of that shot, and the t-shirt's still on the chair. Thank you. Gold number 1. It's like little things like that. I retain a lot of movie, not just trivia, but little errors and things. And Almost Famous, it drives me crazy every time I see it. Somebody should have caught that the shirt was tossed off in one take. But it occurs to me they may not have shot that coverage on the same day, and they may have just overlooked it, but there wasn't, I guess the continuity department wasn't on it. It's just one of those things in films. There's some other great ones just in general. Somebody mentioned Val Kilmer earlier. So Tombstone has so many mistakes that are really, really glaring mistakes. But if you know the story of how Tombstone was made, it makes a lot of sense. Ultimately, how's it going, Just Lily? That film had a different director at the beginning of it. And he was either fired or let go by the production, and so they wouldn't have to shut down. Kurt Russell directed, and then they brought on a third director who didn't get along with anyone, who started fights with Michael Biehn, who played Johnny Ringo. And apparently that director was not very nice to a lot of the extras and background actors. And so a lot of that film is kind of cobbled together from 3 different directors' coverage So having all the little errors in there is part of it. But oh, there's a couple like fun ones. There's a part where, again, spoiler alert, it's an old movie, so I assume you've either seen it or you don't care. But it's right after Morgan passes away. Kurt Russell has blood all over his hands, and he touches multiple people, and it's supposed to be like shimmering wet blood, and it doesn't smear on anyone at all. And then he runs out into the rain, and he's yelling into the sky, and it's not raining behind him, just right on top of him. It's like a very clear, hard line where the rain machines didn't cover behind him, and I think that they were probably under the impression that the cinematography like would compensate by having it completely dark in the background of the shot, but you can very clearly see it. You don't want to interrupt, but you'll be back later. Cool. I'll be drawing for a while. We're just over the hour mark, so at least got another hour or two. Another fun mistake in that film is Curly Bill Brosi when he is kind of having his like wild times before he gets grabbed by the ear by Wyatt Earp. He fires 13 rounds out of 2 6-shooters without reloading. And then also the props department or whoever handles it, there's significant delays when the glass breaks when he's firing into windows from less than 10 feet away. Just like a misfire in their squibs or however they did that. But it's kind of like an old-time film. I mean, it is as raw as it gets in terms of those types of films. There's tons of these. There's in just about every film, unless it's a David Fincher film, there's mistakes like that. I mean, there's like I'd say the most classic one, if anyone's a Star Wars fan, in A New Hope, if you can get a hold of the original unedited version before Lucas lost it and started remaking literally every scene of his films. When the stormtroopers run into the room that they're in on the Death Star when they're trying to figure out where the princess is, one of them, I believe, from the viewer's perspective, he's on the back right of the group, smacks his helmet right on the door. And that was in the original cut of the film. I used to have them on VHS, and we thought that was hilarious. Yeah, he really nails his forehead on it, which is funny because they're all roughly the same height, so it had to be just the slightest bit of difference, you know. But I think they digitally repaired that, and so it's no longer in, like, if you watch it on like Disney Plus, it's not there anymore. Which, I don't know, I think like that kind of stuff, if it made it to the final cut of the film, just leave it. It's something that fans love, you know. I think people appreciate that there's a million things going on set. And maybe, like, speaking to my point earlier, that might be why they left the t-shirt error in Almost Famous. They may have noticed it and thought, it's a funny detail. I'm trying to think of some other fun ones. It's kind of hard to think of them as I'm sitting here drawing, but they'll come to me. Take a little water break real quick. See if it's quiet outside now. Quiet enough. Little city ambience for everyone. So I've mentioned this in all of these, so if anyone goes back in the archive, it's going to be redundant. So I've been drawing every day at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time in California for the last, today is 23 days. Just trying to get a little more accountability for myself in drawing. So I stop hopping around from different styles and stick with one series for a while. And then I've had a lot of requests from people to sort of show the process of the drawings that I do. So this is kind of the idea behind it, was to document it as I sort of do what I would be doing in my downtime anyway. But for the most part, I try not to talk about the art unless people are asking questions, because you have to remember I'm sitting here drawing for hours at a time, and I will bore myself to sleep. Which, funny thing is, one of the first YouTube lives that I did, it's been a couple months back, was a ballpoint pen drawing of a panda. There's 2 videos of it, I think. And I was trying to draw mostly in silence because there was a microphone attached to my pen, and I got so bored not talking or really listening to anything, I actually fell asleep on one of those live streams. So I just woke up and drew a little bit more like I didn't fall asleep, and then continued on the next one, which also explains why that drawing is not one of my personal favorites. But I talked a bit about this yesterday. I used to draw at cafes a lot, and this is kind of just like a more controlled version of that, since I've got my lights and my desk and don't have to worry about someone snagging my phone off the table as I'm drawing. Like I mentioned, I live in San Francisco, so there's definitely a little bit of that goes on in the city, so it's a little less peaceful. I also get like the occasional conversations going, and then I won't draw for a long time while I'm talking with people. Whereas on here, I can keep drawing and talking, since you're not looking me in the eye. And then kind of a running theme with these is just how loud our neighbors are. So multiple times in one stream, you will hear them do dishes like they're throwing them from across the room. Which is why I don't mark these as ASMR, because unless you love the sound of close quarters apartment living, it's not exactly ASMR. However, I do have a really monotone voice, so maybe that counts. Just trying to think kind of in line with what I talked about on some of the other portraits, because the last week and a half or so I've been drawing this style. I think almost 2 weeks this style. So I've drawn Joaquin Phoenix, Josh Brolin, Tom Hardy, and Johnny Depp, all mostly based on photos by Greg Williams or Brian Bowen Smith. It's 2 photographers I like a lot. They're both Leica photographers. And on each one of those, I kept trying to think of favorite films that these guys are in. And as basic of an answer as it is, I'm pretty sure that either Cliff Booth, his character in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, or Fight Club are my favorites of his. Especially if anyone's a fan of Fight Club or just filmmaking in general, it's worth it to watch the commentary of that film. It's like a miniature film school in itself. because it's Fincher, Brad Pitt, Edward Norton, and Helena Bonham Carter, and she recorded it separate from them, so they have different perspectives, but the things that seem so intentional in that film, a lot of them were thought up on the spot. And so it's interesting to hear them kind of break down how certain aspects of the film ended up how they are so famous for being known now. Especially for a director like David Fincher, because he's infamous for he'll do 150 takes of one scene over and over and over, and then when he gets the one he wants, because he shoots digital now, pretty sure he uses, I don't know if he's on Red or if he's using what's the other system, Alexi or whatever. He'll have them delete every other take after he gets the one that he's looking for. He's so intentional about how all that is, but he also moves people around like set pieces because he wants it to work like clockwork with the camera motion and stuff like that. And so to hear how loose they were about making Fight Club, it kind of makes that movie a very different experience. I also was a really big Chuck Palahniuk fan, the guy that wrote the book. So I had the fortune of reading that book around the time that I saw the film, so it really stuck with me, even though they changed quite a bit from the book. But things that ended up being incredibly famous scenes from that movie, a lot of it was ad-lib dialogue. They were just so dialed into the characters in the book that they were able to play with it like that. Which I'd be curious to see what Palahniuk thought of the film. Because the only two movies that I know of that he wrote a book for, or that he wrote the book that they were based on, were Fight Club and Choke. And Choke was a pretty awful movie, in my opinion. Great cast. I mean, it was not too dissimilar from the Fight Club cast. I know there were several of the same smaller roles that were in that also have worked with Fincher a lot. I mean, Sam Rockwell was the main character. It just was I think a less appealing story, so people didn't really grab onto it like they did Fight Club. I think also like the timing of it and the relatability of a lot of the points that they made in the book and the film resonated with a lot of young dudes. But there's like little details for anyone who has seen the film and knows it well enough. When they are drunk in Tyler's front yard outside of the house on Paper Street and they're hitting golf balls, they're actually hitting golf balls directly into the side of the catering truck for the film. And they were actually drunk in that scene. There's also the really well-known scene of I'm trying to think, the Raymond K. Essel scene where they scare the guy behind the gas station, and then he says that tomorrow breakfast will taste better than any meal he's ever had. It's kind of like a revelationary scene. And the end of that, when he scares the guy and tells him to run home, he yells, "Run, Forrest, run." And that was actually Edward Norton's idea. It's not in the book. It's not in the script. And it's, it was made in 98 and 99, so it's, a handful of years, 5-6 years after Forrest Gump came out, so it was still kind of a popular joke. Which leads me to another thing. I've talked about it a little bit, but I run every day, especially if I'm intending to draw. I find that it just good for the health, good for the head. And I have a really huge beard, and someone I know made a joke about me looking like Forrest Gump, in the gym the other day because I run with a hat on, and so I ordered the hat that Forrest is wearing in the running sequence. It's a Bubba Gump shrimp hat, so I thought that was funny. Anyway, I think also like something going back to talking about the film stuff, especially with Fincher, since he's doing the new Cliff Booth story. There's stories that are attached to him where he doesn't really give people much direction. He just has them do it over and over, and a lot of that is kind of the Kubrick method of exhausting people so they look truly exhausted in the take. And I don't know that he's ever really done that with Brad Pitt and a few other people that have been like the main characters in his stories. I wonder if it's because they're just on the same page about what they're doing creatively, or if that's really reserved for certain actors. Like when he made Zodiac, there's certain scenes where he wanted people to enter and leave the frame in the background a certain way, and he had them do those scenes 150 plus times to achieve what he was looking for, and never really told anyone what it was. It's just kind of an interesting thing, because I feel like a lot of directors that are that heavy-handed and that controlling don't usually work with the same actors over and over, but he and Brad Pitt have done quite a few together and are still working together. Which I kind of hope just for that, and also just really loving Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I really hope that they make like a really great companion film for it and not tarnish the sort of character that they built. I feel like there's a few directors that have really done that quite a bit. I know Darren Aronofsky does a similar thing. I'm curious to see what his new film is going to be like, Caught Stealing. I feel like he fell off for a while and wasn't as revered as he once was. So I'm kind of wondering if this is a little bit of a return to his like really stylistic filmmaking. Also has Matt Smith in it, which I'm a big fan of him. I actually have a tattoo of Matt Smith on my arm as Doctor Who, as number 11. Which I don't know if there's any Doctor Who fans that watch these, but I can talk at length about Doctor Who as well, if anyone's wanting to really nerd out. So I was obsessed with it as a kid, and then kind of dived back into it. Actually, a lot of my tattoos, they're old now, but a lot of them are Doctor Who themed. Even my knuckles. My knuckles actually, I'll show you. I think any like real Doctor Who fan or Whovian will appreciate it, but my knuckles actually say Time Lord. And then that's the Atraxi from the Matt Smith episode, the very first one, 11th Hour. And my whole left arm sleeve up to my shoulder is all Doctor Who stuff. But I've had a pretty great appreciation for Matt Smith after he was the 11th Doctor, even though they kind of botched some of his later episodes. But I feel like he kind of gets pigeonholed in his casting. Like, I know he was in The Crown. I know that he was Damon in House of the Dragon, which, talk about a show that wasted a big opportunity. It really fell off. I feel like with shows like that, there's no true like team that heads it up. It's so piecemeal, and everyone's sort of like half of the people were held over from Game of Thrones. But I feel like if people are going to commit to make those kind of shows, they should really commit to the entire thing, or be prepared to hand it off to someone who's capable. I feel like there's a few redeeming qualities in some of the characters in those shows, and Matt Smith is one of them, but even then, a lot of it doesn't seem to make sense. Like, some people age, some people don't. Like, just the practicality of it. The pacing of the story is all over the place. I think with how poorly and slow they told some parts of that story, they really could have just benefited from making like a short miniseries. Either commit to the whole thing and do the entire thing at one pace, or just make, you know, an 8 episodes series of here's what this was, this reference to this thing that they talk about in Game of Thrones and in the books. But they really drew it out and kind of made all the appealing stuff fall apart, which I'm not really watching the numbers. I did just notice that a bunch of people fell off, but whatever. You're here to see what I'm doing, so you can mute it if you don't want to hear me talk about it. But I think where they went wrong with all that stuff is like, everyone thought that they cared about the dragons, which is weird to me. They made the whole thing about like everyone casually having dragons. It's kind of not why people, I don't think most people liked Game of Thrones for that reason. I think it was just a detail. And I think with that kind of stuff, I have very little appreciation for a lot of the people sticking around in those productions. Like the D.B. Weiss and David Benioff thing still makes me feel irritated because they bailed early to go do a Star Wars film because they were tired of working on that material. But how original is a new Star Wars film really going to be? I mean, they can't even get the shows to be reflective of the films. Yeah, anyway, talking about the Matt Smith stuff, I thought he was great in that. There's also, he's had a couple really great parts and things in it. I think he kind of gets overlooked in terms of film. I could never remember the name of the film, but I could tell you every frame of the movie. Just, it was a really well filmed story. It was the one that Ryan Gosling directed, and it had Christina Hendricks and Matt Smith, and it was incredibly well made. But Matt Smith is the sort of villain bully character, and that was as menacing as it gets. I feel like that's a really overlooked role. I'm trying to remember the name of that. I remember it, I think it has something to do with the street that they're on, or the area. It's like almost like a representation of just like one little portion of sort of a Detroit style forgotten neighborhood that's sort of falling apart. Yeah, it's one of those. I used to go to the Alamo Draft House at least once a week for a long time when I lived in Austin. And sometimes I would go even if there wasn't a film I wanted to see, just to, for one, to support that business, but also it's a good way to escape Texas heat. Have full service at a movie theater, so a lot of those films that I saw back then start to blend together in terms of titles, and unless it was like a really specific thing, like I saw Inherent Vice twice in 1 week there. There's a few of them that were like that, where I just kept going back. I kind of get the feeling that most people, when they are watching this, have the sound off, or don't speak English, or just don't use the chat. So I'm doing like the Jeff Goldblum thing in the original Jurassic Park. I'm now sitting in a car by myself talking to myself. That whole scene, for anyone that gets the reference. And he's trying to explain chaos and unpredictability. Let's start expanding over here. The more I look at this, I do think this might be a hairpiece. It's just matched like really well to his actual hair color. The reason I say that is his all of his roots right here are perfectly straight and look like they might be glued down or like laced in. Oh, what's up, Nolan? Oh, no worries, man. I'm happy when people are around to watch. I don't expect anyone to be here every day. I was saying earlier, this is day 23 in a row of drawing at the same time, which I'll be doing for another 12 days. And then the time will change because I'll be traveling a little bit. I've mostly been rambling about TV and film and different aspects of filmmaking while I'm drawing. This is a drawing of Brad Pitt as Cliff Booth, and he is doing a new updated film continuing that character, but directed by David Fincher instead of Tarantino this time. Might be joining the National Guard. Right on. Only do it if you want to. That's what I always say. A lot of my friends went into military. I almost went into the Air Force. I know a lot of them loved it. I grew up next to an Air Force base, so it was kind of like in the water, like everyone was. I wouldn't say it was their backup plan, but it was definitely like in the top 3 things if they didn't get a scholarship for football or baseball or go to what we called our local 13th grade, which is our community college. Yeah, a lot of those guys, a couple of them went career, a few of them went to different branches. I don't know that anyone went to National Guard. It wasn't really as prevalent in our area because we grew up next to the Air Force Base, so I think everyone wanted to be a pilot or a mechanic. But yeah, I've known quite a few guys that have made a good living with that as like a steady base. You mentioned the other day that you were getting ready for college. Would that be in place of college or like tied into it somehow? Nice. Yeah, I think like the biggest thing with that type of stuff, in reference to like National Guard and stuff like that, a lot of my friends that went that direction or they went into military. I mean, I went polar opposite. I was in touring bands when they were doing that, so I was kind of like the party friend, the guy that was in town in between tours or whatever. But a lot of those guys got so routined and like really dialed in that whatever they did after they were done with the service, they did it with 100% all the time. So I saw a lot of them get like really like shifted not just perspective but their productivity. Oh, gotcha. Yeah. Well, this might be the different or a better opportunity for you then. I will say, like, and this is, take this with a grain of salt because I'm just a random dude drawing on YouTube, but I know a lot of people that have gone to really prestigious colleges. I can give you a few examples of guys that went to really incredible film schools that I really wanted to go to and I couldn't, or didn't, I guess is a better way of putting that. And a lot of those guys still call me when they have technical problems or creative problems because they need someone to help problem solve. And I do not have a film degree. I just worked in various levels of production in music and video and photo for so long that really, like, the thing that they gained from that was their social circle. So like it's you know, some of like the best filmmakers, some of the best creators, inventors, a lot of them didn't finish college. So it just kind of depends on what you're looking for. But I also have some friends and family that have spent an absolute fortune on continued education, and some of them are older than me and they have never been in like the real world. They're living on like grants and student loans, and not that that's not the real world, but it's like at some point I think it's nice to not be a student unless you're just a student of life, you know. But I also have a biased opinion because I kind of didn't get that experience and went a very different direction. But you know, like I've mentioned on here before, I do private art lessons and I didn't go to art school. I just obsess over it and dig in, you know. I also could give other examples of people that went to school and have had great experiences utilizing that degree. But I think like the standard of a lot of like post high school education has fallen pretty severely. I mean, just the number of people that have been confirmed to be using ChatGPT for papers and all that, it's like starts to make me wonder when's the shift going to happen. You said you were originally wanting to do biochemistry. Realize it might not be your thing. What do you have to do to be a game warden? Is that like state certifications, or do you have to have like a certain, or is it tied into what you're talking about? Also, I mean, that's one of those jobs that I feel like has existed forever. You know, it's not a job that a computer will be doing anytime soon. You said high school diploma, also physical. Yeah, I mean, that's a solid job. I feel like you'd probably be able to transfer to different places as well. You know, it's one of those things. I think about it all the time because there's this interview of, I can't remember the guy's name off the top of my head. If you Google it, it'll pop up. But he's one of the creators of like the OpenAI stuff, and was one of the guys that was an early developer of getting thought engines to work on their own. And he's resigned from all the companies he worked with, and even like some of his like protege and like celebrated students have done the same, and now they travel around to talk to people about the dangers of relying on it too much. And that if you want to look for like job security, you should be looking at more practical jobs like plumber, electrician, stuff like that. But game warden is something. I mean, what are they going to do? Have a drone do it? Like I think that's going to be a human job for quite a while. It feels like a solid choice. But also it ties directly into like clean food source stuff, which is a big thing right now. I've mentioned this before, but I'm from Texas, so there's a lot of overlap there with like game wardens and sort of the hunting community and all that. Can't remember I don't know why I guess because he's a game warden in the show. There's a show I watched not that long ago, and I can't remember the title, but it was entertaining. It's kind of like a soap opera for dudes. It's a guy who's a game warden in like a small area that he grew up in. Maybe it's Joe something. It was a Paramount Plus show. But that actor is in one of my favorite TV shows of all time, which is Patriot, which is poorly named. They should have named it something else. But that's another sort of undersung, underappreciated, amazing shows because it covers every base. It's funny. It's got like emotional moments. It's sweet. It's got action. Kind of checks every box that people would be into. But he's also the main character in this game warden show that I watched not long ago. Also about stuff like that, I feel like I've known people that have failed classes in college, and then it's like crisis time. Everyone starts panicking, like, oh no, what are you going to do now? It ended up being way more in their favor to not do the same track that they were originally on. I have a cousin who did that. He failed a pretty important class close to his senior year. And I don't know that he works in the field he was studying. He does something with like, I don't know. He got mad when I said junk bonds, but something like that. Unimportant financial stuff, like a hedge fund guy. I'm pretty sure that what he studied in college was partying. Said it a few times this week. I thought I wasn't going to draw someone with a lot of hair on the next one, but to quote the Knight of the Templar, I chose poorly. So it was cool. Oh, thanks. Let's see. So you make sure you have backups so you didn't go into the shits. Yeah, it's a good plan. It's I did that for a while. I had like a bunch of odd jobs that I think I probably appreciate those jobs more than the stuff I ended up doing long term. It's just something I've actually like written about. I think I was talking when you were on the live stream the other day about illustrating like a book or a series about all that stuff because I worked in so many random places. yeah, I had like a backup job in between tours where I worked in production for local news at a TV station. And I think about that job. I mean, I haven't worked there in, I don't know, I think 20 years. And I think about that job all the time. And it was just kind of like a throwaway backup where all my, like, for lack of a better term, like all my dumb party friends from my hometown worked. It's just kind of guaranteed because people quit so often. I could just step in and work whenever I was in town. But yeah, options are good, you know. It's Brad Pitt as Cliff Booth. Yeah, in terms of like the book idea, I mean, it would be short stories that just have illustration. And then I used to be an animator for a number of years. I don't know that I ever want to do that again unless it's attached to like a heftier payout because it's such a tedious thing. But I could also animate the stories. But yeah, like the TV station stuff was like, I wouldn't say happiest, but certainly some of the funniest experiences I had that I really I look back at and think it was so funny even then, and it still like holds up. Nice, yeah. Hopefully it looks like him. I'm still working on his hair, and then I'm gonna build in all the contour and depth on his face. Um, but yeah, about that short story thing, we it was like a local like small town news affiliate, and they were having this big legal battle with, I think it was DirecTV or someone like that, and they wanted to put the free channels on there so people would have to pay so like a pay-per-view type thing or a subscription. This is like West Texas, early 2000s, and our station wouldn't do it, and so we lost all of our sponsorship. And I worked in the most of the time I was in the studio working a camera, and we were so low budget that we had a vintage like tube television with a mirror propped up in front of it so the camera operators could see the TV screen in the mirror to see how much of a delay we had on our live play. I mean, like incredibly low budget. There was duct tape holding everything together. Our weather green screen had a hole in it, so we just pushed the camera 2 feet closer, and he just did a smaller weather report. It was stuff like that, but because they were in that legal battle with the people that wanted to change how they distributed the TV, we lost all of our sponsors except for, I should remember because I saw it 1,000 times. I think it was a Dodge pickup commercial, and it was a coup de grace song. And so it would just play the commercial, and then there'd be 3 seconds of blank air, and then it would just play again. So every commercial break, it would play that like 4 times. And it just got to the point where we, like, everyone in the studio would start laughing because we heard that commercial, you know, in one day we would hear it probably 75 times. So it just kind of became white noise. But it was like just an old school studio. Nothing was digital. It was all analog cameras, like these giant Ikegami TV studio cameras, and the other jobs were like running VTRs, which are like giant. The closest thing is like a VHS tape. It's like a giant VHS, and you have to roll the tapes to a certain count and then hit play when the director of the show tells you to. So it was like, felt high pressure for an 18-year-old, but it was a cool job. A lot of like interesting characters worked there because it was just a bunch of like burnouts, and there were a couple dudes that were ex-military that were really tight-laced, but also pretty funny behind the scenes. And like the amount of vulgar stuff that happens a half second before people are on air is kind of astonishing. I still wonder if it's like that in a lot of studios. But that's like one of many jobs that I had, so I thought about doing sort of illustrated, like write the stories in short story form and then illustrate some of the characters and, you know, something along those lines. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stories in general. One of my other weirdest jobs, I worked for this guy who had a sod farm. He just grew like giant tracts of sod for people's yards and golf courses. And we would harvest it with him. So we'd stand on the back of a tractor that has like a harvester on it, and then we would just throw pieces of sod like, all day long. But he also built like pop-up water ski courses. It's a company called Slalom. He was an odd dude. Out in West Texas, he had like waist-length hair, like I don't know, it was kind of like a funny old hippie, but he would just bail off of the tractor some days and run full clip to his house. And I learned later, because we'd walk back when he did that he didn't want to miss King of the Hill. So he just realized what time it was and would just leave the tractor in the middle of the field and run back, so it'd take too long to ride it back. Yeah, lots and lots of odd characters and, you know, people that I just met. Also, West Texas is kind of, because that's where I was for so long, and then Austin, so many characters in general. She said, speaking of knowing another experience, some jobs would be good. Yeah, like, that's another aspect of that, is that all the random jobs I had, I ultimately was doing those either in between tours or when one band kind of fell apart. And so, like, in retrospect, it was, at the time, potentially stressful sometimes, you know, because you're thinking, oh no, how am I going to pay for rent and car payments and all that stuff. But ultimately, I navigated it fairly well and realized that 90% of jobs then, and even more recently, they just want to know that you can carry a conversation and you'll show up. I mean, when I was talking about the company that I buy these journals from and like most of my drawing supplies and the pens that I have, I went to interview for that company and they read all the standard questions and I just answered like someone that could finish a sentence, and I was 10 minutes early to my interview. And by the end of that conversation, she was telling the store manager that I would be a good manager track person. Like, I didn't even know them, you know? So a lot of the time when people are looking for jobs and they feel like hopeless or stressed about it, half of the time you just got to go in and be, you know, 10% normal, like whatever that is to people. But all the odd jobs, I mean, over the years, I had my favorites for sure, but as someone that's main qualification was music or photography or stuff like that, I was able to get a lot of jobs, you know, because people, most of the time, especially now, they're just looking for someone who's dependable and can at least fake being, like, decent, you know? But I feel like that is like another element of all those odd jobs and things that I did. It was like random stuff. Like I worked at, I think like the most random one was one that our family was kind of, I mean, instrumental in. It was a job that I should have gotten from nepotism, and I did, but I was a certified scale technician because that's what some family members did. And I realized this is more about just like the qualifications of that job. That's a 12-year certification in the state of Texas, and it is an open book test. And if I remember correctly, if you request it, they don't give you a time limit. So me and another guy who had zero experience went to this place, stayed in a hotel, took open book tests that we obviously aced, and then we were certified for 12 years. You know, and it wasn't this massive barrier to entry, it was just the willingness to go and do it. Yeah, like a lot of stuff like that. And then on that job, most of the stuff I learned was just things I figured out by trying to mess around with what I was trying to fix. So I think like I don't know, there's a lot of thought that I've put into that as well. I mean, the last place that I worked, I was really trying to convince myself to stick around there. And it was a partially Japanese owned company, and so there was always like a lot of like little information that we'd get and these things like about Japanese culture and approach to certain, like not just like products but ways of life. And one of the ones that got brought up that I remember is Ikigai. I hope I'm saying that right. And it's like the crossroads of your purpose and your usefulness and like or crossroads of like your utility with your interests. And for me, because I was drawing every day in these journals and collecting pens and stuff like that, and I can hold conversations with people. Like a lot of the time customers would come in and I'd talk to them for 4 hours, and then they just come back in a week later, and all of a sudden it's like people in the neighborhood that just came in there to have a chat and buy something small. My qualifications for that job was that I was on time and could speak. Like, that was it. you know, I didn't really have like anything that was really super on point, because it's not traditionally like an art store. I mean, they did have art supplies that had a lot of different paints and little drawing things and stuff, but they weren't really looking for someone that has my skills. They just needed someone to show up. And that's most jobs, to be honest. I mean, I think that people weren't really, I don't know however you want to word it, people aren't really made to be in jobs all the time, but I don't know. I feel like there's versions of it that aren't too bad. I just had another Forrest Gump moment. That's all I have to say about that. For whatever reason, there's been like a lot of things, not just in stuff I've listened to this week, but Forrest Gump references. Someone made a joke about it at the gym the other day because of my beard and that I'm running. I feel like I'm starting to think in terms of Forrest Gump quotes. Don't really like how that's... Did I get a new recording device? You mean for like these live streams? Oh no, it's the same setup. Does it look different today? Yeah, I didn't know that. You said normally when a chat would come, you could or when it would come in, you could tell because the camera would unfocus. Huh? Yeah, I don't know. No, it's the same setup. Um, Eventually this will change a little bit because right now I just live stream on my phone, and then I have two Lume Cube diffuser lights that are locked off on my desk, and I have a canvas lamp, which if any other artists are out there looking for something to put their phone on to film with, avoid that one. It's basically like a giant spring system, so if I even lightly shake my desk, you'd get seasick, you know? But eventually I'll probably do multicam, so when I'm talking, I can look at a camera so people see who's talking. And then, in a short time span, several people have recommended that I do more of a Bob Ross type thing. Which I don't know how much I agree with that, but like I've said before, I have mini denim shirts and a beard, so I guess that gives off a Bob Ross vibe. But I'd like to have more control over the focus of the camera, kind of like what you're talking about, so I can have like a better playback so I can see it. And then I also want to eventually have my own clean audio setup so I can also have music and stuff. Because I think long term, what I'll probably do for these is I'll either, because a lot of the time, if I'm not drawing live, I'll draw to a metronome or songs that are at a certain BPM. And if I were to do that, I'd want people to hear that. And so, whether it would be music that I make or eventually, I'm going to have people that I'll draw portraits of and they'll play live for a stream. And so I'll have to have multicams and mics for that, which I have most of that now. I just don't want to have to deal with that every time I go live. But hopefully that was just a glitch before. It could also be, I don't think my phone is vibrating when I'm getting messages, so it could just be the app. I had to update the YouTube app because it crashed a few times. I also know that it loses focus if I pass my hands in front of it because it's kind of at its minimum distance of focus right now from the paper. So I'm trying to catch up, make sure I didn't miss anything. It'd be cool to see more angles. Bob Ross ideas can, yeah. I think like, let's see, and then you said whatever it is seems like. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I'm just particular about everything. So if I start to change my setup, it's going to be to improve. And that's kind of why I haven't yet, because I don't necessarily want to start streaming with OBS. And that's like the sort of digital interface that you have to use. And then you have to have all the different inputs. And I kind of like right now that I can just sort of put my phone on and turn all my lights on, start drawing. If anyone's wondering, this is a scar that's on his forehead as this character. I didn't just lose my mind. I'll refine that in a little bit. Thank you. But I think also because I tend to talk through most of these things, it'd be nice to have a face talking instead of just a voice hovering right by the microphone of the camera. Bring this up just a touch. But to be fair, if people want some Bob Ross stuff, I will paint some pretty little trees or whatever, or I'll just do portraits like this. Have you drawn for 2 hours? Yeah. Just I'm a minute and a half, or almost 2 minutes past 2 hours. So I'm gonna try and get a little more contour and depth in his face, and then I'll probably call it after I do that, but it's probably going to be another 45 minutes or so. Yeah, it's Brad Pitt as Cliff Booth, which I've drawn this before. Now that I'm thinking about it, I was talking about this the other day. I have a smaller version of this, which I'll see if I can find right now. I was just thinking of portraits that I've drawn that I did really small. Yeah, so here's like the pocket journal version of him, which is slightly different because I'm drawing for this larger series. I'm just drawing the floating head for now, which I've done for Joaquin Phoenix, Josh Brolin. Trying to think of who else. Johnny Depp, and oh, there's somebody I'm forgetting. There's 4 other ones that I've done. Oh, Tom Hardy was the other one. Thanks. But yeah, the idea is that it's just more of a focus on the face, like that part of the portrait. Because I think it's similar. It's something that I really liked about the way there's a guy named Frederick Warren who goes by Crucible. The way he described his portraits when people ask why he doesn't do like a ton of detail when he draws clothing or the bottom half of his portraits. And it's the main thing I relate with on his description, is that he's really wanting to do a portrait in terms of their face. And so he'll scribble their clothes really sloppily, which I did for a while on some stuff, and it's, my brain craves more structure and everything, in drawing especially. I have to actively remind myself that faces aren't symmetrical, so I don't sit here and try to make them super even. I try to make it more photo accurate. But for these, I'm just going to do the faces for now. And then I've mentioned this before, but all these are for sale if people do want them. I'm happy to sell originals or prints, but I don't really care. It's kind of if somebody's interested. I've had a couple people ask. Remove this real quick. All right. And I'm like just about at the part where I can move my reference photo so there's no more glare. Oh yeah, I'm not saying that for the sake of you buying it. I'm just telling people so I don't have to answer the question later in my emails. Because I do commissions and stuff. Sorry for the noise. We've got a neighbor making some noise outside. I do commissions and little pieces like that, but these are kind of just drawing characters and actors that I like, and sort of what I mentioned before about how it's more about like finding, I guess, like community of people that appreciate this type of stuff, and then just having some more accountability for myself to draw daily. But in my experience, even with art and photography, most of the time in sales and stuff like that, I feel like it's like feast or famine. It either pops up somehow on somebody's feed and a few people are interested, or nobody is for a long time. I think it's just because everything's so saturated now. And half of the time, like last year, I think I mentioned this the other day, I had someone reach out to me to talk about doing illustration for a book that they were writing with their husband. And the second that we start throwing around budget stuff, and I mention even like a pretty minuscule budget, they stop talking. And I think that people, it's not even really that much, but I think a lot of the time people, especially when they're trying to commission things, they're weighing out the cost benefit of not just doing like AI, because you can literally go and tell ChatGPT or whatever to create something in an artist, like a specific artist style, and it will render a pretty accurate version of it. I've actually done it a few times, just truly like trying to test, because I saw this whole panic thing about how AI is going to start taking artist jobs. And it does actually do a pretty good job. I've done a couple portraits based on like a essentially a painting that doesn't actually exist, just so I could have something that wasn't a Google image, which whatever. But yeah, I don't know. I think that there's also something, I've talked about this a bit too, but so many people are selling stuff now that it's just like a constant barrage of take my class, buy this thing, like, you know, everybody. It's just, it gets to a point where I feel like there's got to be people who are just bored in the evenings and want to watch some art, you know. I mean, I definitely, in my downtime, I've watched stuff kind of similar to this. But I feel like that's what like most social media is now, because it's also like data driven and like sales driven. And I say that knowingly. I know I teach private lessons, but it's not like a, that literally was born out of working in that store I mentioned, and someone asking if I taught, and I said I was willing to teach, you know, certain things, and then they asked if I would teach to draw a very specific style that I already had been drawing, and then that just kind of grew from there. So it wasn't from like running an ad about like, you want to know 3 hacks on how to do this? Because I think like something that everyone should know is that there is no hack for this. And anything that you want to be truly good at, there's not a hack. It's just time spent. Like, get used to digging in, you know, and you'll either love it or you won't, and then it informs you on what to do next. But it's the same as like being being a musician is a good example, like, because that was my previous career for a long time. There would be guys who had gear that would cost 10 times of what everything I had in every bag and case, and then they would play with no dynamic on volume 100 the entire time and have no real tempo. They would fluctuate like they had never played to a metronome. Or guitar players that show up and have a 30-year-old tube amp and, you know, $2,000 on their pedal board, and they bought all this stuff to kind of armor themselves to the fact that they don't practice really. And then they get on stage and make a fool of themselves, and then it was kind of the same. Like I've seen, it's like a character type in the creative world of, they get off stage and when it went poorly, like, oh yeah, you know, this pedal did this and this amp did that, and my guitar, I need to get it. And it's like, just play like 10 shows with just a guitar and an amp and a tuner, and you'll notice on your 11th show, all of a sudden all that gear starts to not be necessary. It's about time spent with the bare minimum a lot of the time. Let's see. You said you like knowing that someone put their passion into what they made, otherwise it just feels lacking in some manner, even with normal stuff like pots and pans. Yeah, I mean, like, it's, I wouldn't say it's a lost art, but when people really pour all their energy into making something good, even if it's like a practical tool or, you know, there's a bunch of stuff. There's one that I think about because I'm always convincing myself I don't need it, but I will probably buy it because I'm mentioning it right now. There's a guy that my brother told me about that makes miniature guitar amps that you can fit into like a cigarette box. And he just figured out how to make them, and that's what he does. It's like you can go and get like different colors of the amp, It's like kind of like a little guitar tech sort of tester you can throw in the case. But it's not like some big ploy of like, how can I sell this to a major chain and they can reproduce it with the crappiest parts possible. You know, it seems like it is actually born out of like him just thinking, what a cool idea, you know. I've seen a lot of guys do stuff like that where they're passionate about something, and so they'll develop something that enhances that after they've spent a ton of time in it. For a little while, I was toying with the idea of developing a pen that would be kind of similar to like my favorite pens, and then I kind of came to my senses and realized like nobody needs that. There's a million different pens, and ultimately, the pen isn't going to change your drawing. I mean, if you draw well, you draw well, and even then, there's plenty of missed drawings and portraits and things that I didn't really nail, whether it was from lack of energy or focus, or maybe it was drawing someone I didn't really care about, you know. But I don't know, there's this big emphasis on like sort of like the get rich quick vibe. I think like it's crept up on everyone on social media because nobody watches like old school TV anymore. Jesus, sorry, our neighbors are so loud. Hopefully no one's volume is way up or it's gonna be a little bit loud. But there used to be like infomercials on TV all the time, and I'm sure there still are, just nobody watches anything that isn't streaming. But it used to be get rich quick schemes and buying silver and gold and, you know, stuff like that. And that's kind of like the modern day equivalent is people selling like their version of mushroom lion's mane coffee that's better for you for this reason. And then, you know, it's just like I feel like there's like an endless cycle of products, and it's starting to bleed over into the creative world where people are trying to convince one another that like there's hacks to learning how to do something creatively well. And I mean, there is some truth to that. Some people are just naturally inclined to be creative. It can be a genetic thing. Like I have in my family a lot of musicians and artists, and they're all pretty talented, and that definitely benefited me. But I also grew up around it, so it was just kind of in the water. But that said, I had to work to get to a certain level where I felt like I would want to display what I'm drawing or painting or the music I make or the photos I'm taking, you know. There's a level of effort that has to go into it. Otherwise, it's just sort of like a hobby, you know. Which there's nothing wrong with a casual hobby, but I'm just not I wouldn't say I'm a hobbyist. But it enrages me anytime I see those courses that are like, do you always wish you could draw? Now you can, because this, and that. I think a lot of it is geared towards people who don't have the patience to watch a whole video, or people that hold their phone the entire time they're watching a movie, so they're kind of halfway getting what the point of the movie is. Anyway, rant over. I don't know what my neighbor's doing, but it seems to always be happening when I'm in here drawing. Just like single-handedly making me want to move into a house and never live in an apartment again. Hopefully it's not too loud for y'all. It's pretty shockingly loud in here. Let's see, I'm making sure I'm not missing anything. Do I have music online? Curious to hear. Yeah, I do have some. see, always admired but not actually good enough to do anything like drawing or playing guitar. I can write pretty okay. I mean, writing is one of the hardest art forms in general. It's like doing homework forever, which is something I have like 3 books that I've started writing, and one of them is the one I was talking about, the odd job stuff. And every time I really sit down to work on it, I get other ideas, which tells me that I'm probably just not ready to write that. So if you're good at writing, that's something to lean into. I mean, even if it's just like a passion. But I will say, like, if you put in the time and you find the right like learning sources, there are ways to learn how to draw. Like Domestika is a good resource. Um, I'm always happy to answer questions on here for anyone who's wanting to know technical stuff. I've said it a bunch of times, but I mainly don't talk about art the whole time because it's like a dentist going home and looking at teeth for fun. It's like talking about process while I'm doing it is a little bit boring. But yeah, my music, there's not a ton of it right now because I just started releasing my own solo stuff because I've played like predominantly as like a hired player for bands or been in bands for most of like my music career. My stuff is called Mink Chromatic, MinkChromatic, and it's on everything. It's on Spotify and iTunes and all that, which I should have like, I don't know, I think I have 3 just about ready to release, so there should be more coming out later this year, but it's kind of a long, slow burning work in progress. But that's another example of like, even with my music stuff, I've recorded it at different phases of life. Some of it's old and I just released it all at the same time. Some of it is cobbled together from random tracks, but every bit of it is years of accumulating certain stuff, learning how to play lap steel, learning how to record everything, in a style that I actually like. Like, that's something that I think is usually overlooked by like a casual listener, is that recording in the style that you like is much harder than just recording what you can with what you have. And so I feel like it kind of delayed a lot of my effort in really like rushing music out, because I know like a lot of people, especially in the old scene that I was in Austin, there's this big push of like, I'm working on music, I'm releasing it soon, we're in the studio, we're going to be working on music. Like, they're reminding everyone all the time, and then they rush to get everything out all the time. But it's one of those things where it's like, you should put the effort into it and then just release it, like kind of like what I've talked about with some of these projects that I've been drawing. You don't want to overwork it, but at the same time you do want to work it enough where you feel like you've done enough that you can leave it alone. I feel like finding that balance is a little bit harder when you're doing full production on your own, which is why I come back to like drawing and photography. It's a little bit more of a, not exactly an instant gratification, but it is I don't know, it's a quicker return for the effort, um, it takes a lot of effort to get to a point where you're happy with drawings, which for the most part, I'd say, I don't know, 7 out of 10 I'm happy with at this point, which is pretty good for me. So do you know how to draw? Just don't put in the practice, but I respect those who do, no less. All right, let's see. I think it's great that people enjoy art in the way they do. Thanks. Yeah, the discipline is the main thing, and it translates to everything. It's why when I was first, like, I think I've probably mentioned it every time I've streamed this week, but the days that I go and run, which is almost every day now, I enjoy the drawing process even more because it's essentially just kind of trading where I'm getting like dopamine and endorphins. So like it makes the discipline of it, I think, more enjoyable, you know? Like I used to hate running, and now I've gotten to the point where on the days that I don't run, I feel like I didn't do anything. And I feel like for drawing, it's the same thing. Like anything you really put a certain amount of discipline and time into, you start to feel that way. I think it's like for the same reason that people tend to care about their jobs a lot. Just because your time spent, you have no, you know, you have like basically you have to be there. So it's kind of like a different type of discipline. But I used to have to remind myself that none of it mattered where I worked because I clocked out at the end of the day. But for people that are super disciplined with anything, I think it kind of bleeds over into other practices in life. But I think like I'm also fortunate to have stumbled into drawing how like not technically how I do, but the fact that I've been able to keep it up for a long time. Because I've played instruments my whole life, and I love that and enjoy it and play at least a little every day. But there's a thing I think about, like it's a Mark Maron thing that he randomly said too. I don't even remember who it was, but they asked him if he played guitar, and he said yeah. And then they asked if he played in bands, and they mentioned a band that they were in, and he said it doesn't represent like a failure or like shame sitting in the corner of my room. It's just a guitar I like to play. And that distinction is one that I think only people who have tried something intensely and then it not worked out would understand. And there are elements of that with playing music where I feel like there's certain songs I don't even want to play anymore or hear anymore because of that. And drawing, on the other hand, is a creative process where I don't have any of that. Even when I've not had commissions go my way, or like a thing that I've mentioned a little bit, someone relatively well known asked if I would do illustration for her husband's book, and then ghosted after we talked for a while. And I was really excited about that, but then ultimately I was drawing every day anyway. It just would have been different input on what I would have been drawing. So it would have been my style of illustration and just with their input of what they want me to draw. So it's kind of like the same discipline with just a different request, a different input. But I don't know, the disappointment of that one didn't really hit me like failures of certain bands or projects that didn't go over well, or like music videos or animation I used to make that didn't hit how I thought it would. Animation's another good one that I have. If you go back far enough on the channel that I'm live streaming on right now, there's hundreds of animated videos. And that's just the ones that I either had the legal rights to release or that I made for myself or my bands. There's like animated music videos and videos that are kind of a blend of those, and that's is it Malcolm Gladwell that does the 10,000 hours stuff? I definitely exceeded 10,000 hours on all that, but it's one of those things where it's a love-hate relationship because it paid the bills and was a seemingly cool job, but then the stress of the unrealistic expectations of people wanting animation kind of got to me, and it doesn't feel fun like drawing does to me, even though there is kind of like a magical quality of making something and being really excited to show people like that. So maybe I'll dip back into animation at some point, but what's your favorite thing to draw? Really portraits. I mean, I've done urban architecture, I've done some scene drawings. I've tried to draw like more observational, like random items on a table, or I used to do this thing where I'd set a timer and draw for 10 minutes with a fountain pen, and it was kind of whatever's in front of me. So it'd be like our couch with unfolded laundry on it from the day, or a new desk lamp that I got for my wife and stuff like that. But I always gravitate back to portraits, kind of similar to photography for me. Like I would rather have a specific focal point, so the eyes of this or any other portrait is kind of what I'm looking at. That's also usually why in this series in particular, um, I put a little bit more detail in the eyes than I do everywhere else. Like I'll get the eyes to be more photoreal than I will try to get like a direct on, like a representation of the hair, but just different styles of portraits. But I think what I'm doing right now is it's kind of like the old favorite of my stuff. I like the drawing in graphite, so there's a little bit of a forgiving nature. So if I do something that I don't like, I can kind of repair it or start over. You know, like yesterday on the end of the Johnny Depp portrait that I was drawing, his hair kind of looked like a Karen haircut, and so I went in and started removing strands, and you can't really do that with ink, or you can with paint if you want to paint over it, which I also paint a bit. At some point I'll probably live stream that. I have like a sort of retro future family portrait thing that I've been working on that's kind of like a poor man's Norman Rockwell style. So I might, if I can get the other camera stuff set up, I might live stream finishing that one. But that will be literally watching paint dry. It is a boring thing to watch, I think, because it's not time-lapsed. But I lose interest in that stuff. It requires a lot more energy, and even something as simple as like I have to remember to not paint in nice clothes, or I've got to wear an apron the whole time, or I've got to go between sitting and standing over and over. I think the ease of drawing is what I like, but portraits in particular, it's a little more finite. Yeah, but I think for some people they'd be into it. One thing I regret is not time lapsing the painting that I was making, because it was kind of an exploratory thing. I haven't painted as much as I, you know, would like to on a larger canvas, and it's I don't know, I think for the next time when I work again, I'm going to do oil paint, because the acrylic is just too time sensitive. But I think if I had shown the live stream of that, that would have been cool, because I basically built it up from like the background sky and then into multiple scenes that are kind of layer upon layer. So maybe it wouldn't be too boring. It wouldn't be as fast as Bob Ross, that's for sure. It's been like a running theme this week. Some of our neighbors have been cooking with their windows open. I'm starving right now. They made homemade flour tortillas a few days ago. I mentioned that I wish this could be smell-o-vision, because they burned one and that even smelled great. I don't know what they're making right now, but I'm about to climb out of the window and ask. think another benefit for changing the setup of how I have these drawings captured, where it's the top-down view that you have, is having the camera that is capturing the drawing like on the other side, so I don't have to draw with my head at an angle, because I have to kind of compensate for the fact that I'm looking at it askance. Yeah, you could go for some homemade honey bread, is what you said. What is honey bread? I don't know that I know that term. Maybe that's I think you said you're from Pennsylvania. Is that like a East Coast thing? I'm doing about 10% on hair. I'm gonna finish the hair tomorrow for tomorrow's drawing. I've kind of overloaded my ability to draw hair anymore this week, so I will finish that tomorrow. You said honey bread. It's just bread that you put a bit of honey into the dough. Oh, during the dough making process, and then it's spun. That's interesting. And maybe I just miss that in general. I don't know if that's specific to that part of the country or not. See, now there's a whole thing about honey bread. Had honey bread at the is that Minnesota or Montana State Fair? Ah, gotcha. Yeah, I'm from Texas, so it's I feel like when it's stuff like that, it was always like tortillas or like traditional gorditas. Minnesota. Yeah. I haven't been to Minnesota in a while. I feel like state fair food to me is like I've played at a handful of them in bands. Oh yeah, king cake I know because my wife is from Louisiana, so that's pun intended. It's baked in. State food or state fair food to me is like I don't know, like a big turkey leg, yeah, stuff like that. Or I think of the Texas State Fair, so it's like deep fried Oreos, or they have all kinds of weird deep fried stuff. But the turkey leg, I think, is like the classic. It's the roaming dad sort of checklist. Like, show up, turkey leg, get I think for a certain demographic, a giant $18 beer, and then you wander around with that. Texas version of honey bread is probably BBQ ribs. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think of brisket when I think of Texas meats, for the most part. I mean, definitely ribs, but it might just be a regional thing. Yeah, anytime I have brisket from somewhere else, it's never quite the same as like a Texas brisket. But I have a big beard and mustache, so ribs are never a go-to for me unless I want to like comb barbecue sauce out of my facial hair for an hour. Not to say that I don't like ribs, but yeah, king cake though. My wife's from Louisiana, so that's we know that one. Yeah, king cake is something because we haven't lived down there in a long time. Well, he hasn't done it this last year or the year before, I guess. Or he did the year before. Her dad would ship us a king cake from this bakery. So, like with the plastic baby and all. That's where your mom's from, is Louisiana. From southern Louisiana? Yeah. So that's where all her people are. Is your mom Cajun? So that's like basically all my in-laws are Cajun for the most part well, definitely on that side. Oh, gotcha. Yeah, I actually miss being in Louisiana. We lived there for a minute, um, but we were in northern Louisiana, so it's a bit different. The area we were in, the sort of running joke is that the state wanted to redraw the state line and give that city back to Texas, and Texas said no. So it was a little different than being in southern Louisiana, but we went down there a good amount. And then I was down there earlier this year on an artist retreat, like out on a farm with one of my friends, which was nice because it was like sort of the best of the best for food. And got to go like hear some Zydeco and stuff like that. But that was before I was making videos, so I think there's only like photos and drawings that I did that I've posted from that. You're saying, speaking of Texas, apparently you have a whole chunk of your bloodline out there. Yeah, Texas is I feel like it's kind of like the Rome of the modern US. Like all roads lead back there somehow. It's really weird. Like I've had a lot of people share, and like especially when I was touring for a living, I'd be in different states all the time, and they would share all this interesting history. And like, oddly enough, it's from this place where you're from in Texas. We had years ago. There was this little town my dad lived in. And it's kind of where I like lived when I was in high school. So many years ago, and he had told one of our older family members the name of the city, and she said, "Oh, I think your great grandparents got married there." And sure enough, we went to the local historic village, and there was a marriage record. Completely unrelated. They didn't live there, so it was just kind of like a random coincidence. But Texas is also just so big. I mean, statistically, a lot of stuff is gonna lead back to it. It's also, I think, a lesser known thing, um, because Texas had, I think, Port Arthur and Galveston and all the different port cities there. A lot of people actually immigrated through there, instead of going to New York and like different areas like that where it was a slightly different process, which they kind of nodded to in that awful show 1923, but they didn't really do a great job of really explaining that. And then there's, of course, like all the history there. Like a lot of people aren't, I don't think they know, even a lot of the people who live there, but like Fredericksburg and uh, there's like a whole band of cities that are all kind of in that stretch of Texas, and a lot of that was imprisoned German soldiers. And at the end of the war, instead of going back, they stayed in Texas. So there's like restaurants that specifically have a German menu and German beer, and bratwurst, and stuff like that. There's also trying to remember the name of this town. I think it's not Brownwood, but it's the town right next to it. They kind of grew into each other after a while. There's this really beautiful handmade wooden hanger that was made in like the 30s and 40s by prisoners of war. And then I used to go out there for one of the jobs that I mentioned earlier, and there's plaques on the wall with lists of these guys, and a lot of them settled in Texas. So it's kind of interesting, like the amount of random culture that accumulated, and the different sources for it. And of course, all the interesting like cattle history. I don't have a translator. Thank you for the compliment. Yeah, I'm about as low key on tech as it gets right now. I'm basically just pointing my phone at this with it plugged in, and technology's mostly in my lights, my tripod. Does it say what language that is? Just out of curiosity. Oh, okay, gotcha. I don't know how to say thank you in Ukrainian, but I appreciate that. I know it's a different dialect than Russian, as far as I understand. One of my neighbors is Russian. I asked him about that. He said that because there's people that we knew that were from Ukraine, and he said that they can talk, but not as well as you would think. I'm pretty sure he's from Moscow. Thanks for letting me know, by the way. Oh, cool. Thank you. Yeah, I use Google Translate a lot. Uh, like earlier this year, we took a trip and it was kind of a lifesaver. I think also like when traveling internationally, especially because we were in Italy, people really appreciated the effort for us to try and learn how to say anything. So like I would always pull stuff up and try to memorize it before I knew I was going to ask something. And it was like night and day between the people that would just loudly order or ask for help in English. But yeah, I'm too low tech with this setup right now to be able to use it. You mentioned the National Guard stuff earlier. Do you get to travel with that? I never even thought about that. Like, as opposed to like traditional Air Force or other branches of that. I mean, I know it's national, so I imagine it'd probably be less of that unless you go somewhere that's bordering like Canada or something. I'm also fully aware of how ignorant that sounds, but I'm happy to admit I don't know much about National Guard in terms of station and stuff like that. Gotcha. I figured like with that it'd be slightly different um, than like a different branch. Because I had friends that, like specifically the guys that didn't go into the Air Force, um, like there were a couple Army guys and stuff, and they moved around all the time and were stationed in all these pretty far out places, which I thought was kind of interesting. Because most of them had like mechanic jobs and they did admin, so they weren't really expected to like. I don't think that any of them really were going to see any sort of like combat stuff. I'm also old enough though now that this was like during when there was more active stuff going on. Gotcha. So you'd probably be in Pennsylvania then still. Yeah, I was always envious of some of those guys that were getting stationed in cool places and working on planes and stuff like that. I thought that was one of the cooler jobs that I could have. Oh, okay, gotcha. Two National Guard, or one potential and one previously enlisted, I guess. That's how you put that. I'll be totally honest. I wasn't sure if this was my brother chatting for a while because my brother's name is Travis, and I don't know what his YouTube icon looks like. So I was like, I don't know if that's because you asked about music and stuff earlier. Um, but he definitely wasn't in the National Guard, so that answered that question. Yeah, when I saw the name pop up, I was like, I wonder if he's watching. Okay. I know he jumps in sometimes, but I don't think he uses the chat. Alright, so I'm gonna draw for a few more minutes, probably about 5.5 more minutes. I'm just gonna let it get to like the 3-hour mark. And then I'll be back on tomorrow at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time again. Tomorrow will be 24 days in a row. And then as of today, I think there's 12 more days of drawing at that time, and then I gotta figure out what time I'll be drawing while I'm traveling. But these are also archived if anybody wants to watch me draw and hear me ramble. And then if anyone has like suggestions of other times, I know I'm kind of missing like a big demographic of like all of Europe because they're asleep right now. But I feel like 5 is more out of convenience for my schedule since it's kind of end of our day out here. I've thought about doing maybe like a morning one as well. Cool. Thanks, Nolan. So appreciate you being helpful also with the translate and carrying on the conversation. It is always much nicer to draw and talk with people instead of trying to think of what I'm, rambling about. I feel like this portrait came together a lot faster than I was expecting. I'm definitely seeing areas that I'm going to focus on for tomorrow's drawing. And then highly likely I'll finish this one tomorrow and start a new one. Right on. Thank you, Travis. Appreciate you watching and talking. And yeah, like I said, I'll be on at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, so like California time. I usually do, I think the shortest one I've done is an hour and a half, but usually I'm on for 2 or 3 hours. I want to be able to show like a good amount of progress while I draw. Right on. So definitely I'm going to put a lot of effort into his hair tomorrow. I'm going to do a little bit of adjusting on his mouth. It still looks slightly off even though he's at an odd angle. But all in all, to be honest, I'm happier with this one than how the last one turned out, which is it's kind of what I was saying earlier, 7 out of 10. So assuming that I draw, I think 5 more in this exact series, let's see how accurate I am. Just start pulling this all in random directions. And then for anyone that is either watching now or in the archive later, if you don't have the patience or time to watch me draw for several hours, these are all time-lapsed in my shorts, usually a couple days after I finish each one. So then you can see the full progress from scratch to finish in about 10 seconds. Oh, can you hear the sirens? Yeah, it's I'll be honest, in San Francisco, it's almost more strange to not hear sirens. I feel like they're always going. Um, that's probably fire trucks. I feel like 3 times a day there's a notification that says firefighters investigated burning pot in building, like people who are bad at cooking. It's like, I'd say 9 out of 10 of those, it's like ambulance or firefighter. But also, San Francisco is famous for um, like a lot of I don't know. I'm trying to think of the nicest way to put this, but basically like heavily affected individuals, um, like substance abuse and stuff like that. So lots of ambulances get called. But yeah, it's all the time here. It's I'd say it's not quite like being in New York or a city where you have more of like the tall buildings that it reverberates off of, but we definitely get a lot of it. And they also, a lot of the firefighters and ambulances kind of get deployed on, it seems like all the same stuff. Just kind of EMTs with different cars as the sort of feel out here. So just like a funny thing. I know I only have like a minute left, but um, I'm wondering like what San Francisco did to do this, but we kind of have a running joke. All the firefighters here look like Disney princes. Like, it's kind of comical. They're all jacked. They all have really big, like, mustaches and then, like, Disney prince hair. It's like collectively the most movie-friendly fire department that I've ever seen. So yeah, they may just be driving around. Sometimes I have like the Citizen app, so I'll see like what it is. Where a lot of people get trapped in elevators, which is mind-boggling. 'Cause there's not a ton of tall buildings in our area, so I don't know. But yeah, they could just be cruising. They definitely, I've seen them do that and then roll up to get coffee. And we live kind of surrounded by coffee shops. You're trying to grow out one of those. I have one, man. It's a blessing and a curse. It's a lot to keep up with, but also if I don't have a mustache, I look very weird. All right, well, I just hit the 3 hour mark, so I'm gonna go ahead and call it for the night. And then, like I was saying earlier, I'll be back on 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time tomorrow. But see y'all here or watching the archive. Thanks again, Travis and Nolan, for talking and helping me not be so bored. All right, thanks everybody.